Hello, and thank you so much to be with us. Welcome, Vicky Isley and Paul Smith. We're very happy to have you here on Zoom, but here with us in the Pays de la Meige. You're both two wonderful British artists, and you've been collaborating since 2005, I think, in a duo, which is named Boredom Research. Can you just tell us who you are?
Okay, so obviously I'm Vicky.
And I'm Paul.
And actually, we've been working as Boredom Research since 1999, so a little bit longer than 2015. But over that kind of 20 years, we've been creating moving image artworks, often in collaboration with scientists. So since 2016, we've been collaborating with scientists and conservation groups as well.
And this is what is very special in your work. You claim to work to reunify splinter domains, which are, of course, arts, science, in another hand, which were once maybe very close disciplines, and of course, society. All that with the help of computational technologies, which is hard to say for a French girl. We're here. You've been working in a world which is completely shaped by humans and their imagery. What kind of imaginary do you want to shape and to create? How did you begin to work on this material, linking all those domains which are not as close as we could imagine?
Sure. I mean, it's a really interesting question. It's really interesting to think, who are the humans that shape our world? Are they the scientists that offer us new interventions, or the artists that respond to the world that they experience around them, or the citizens whose kind of aggregate or combined actions en masse kind of multiply those former two? So, I mean, if we think of this more as a system of kind of complex interacting parts, then maybe that's more kind of useful to think of it in many ways as a whole.
So, for example, when we produced Robots in Distress in 2017, we worked with scientists who had a vision to build a robotic swarm that would rise to the challenges of working in the heavily polluted waters of the Venice Lagoon. So their approach was centered on a robust engineering solution, which at that time was inspired by the honeybee.
And what really kind of struck us was the honeybee is an organism in crisis, that they're literally dying from a variety of factors, including pesticides, drought, habitation destruction, air pollution, and lots more. So our response was really to kind of think about, this way of working has been more to do with, or more important to think about, fragility. So we worked with them to create robots that were inherently fragile and literally made from the same rubbish that was polluting the lagoon that they would be working in.
So this led, building these rubbish robots led us to also creating a simulation of a swarm of emotionally enhanced robots that failed to experience agency.
So I suppose when we think of, what kind of imaginary we're hoping to shape or to create, I suppose it's really one that recognizes the fragility of our situation. And that really kind of thinks or questions what is the validity of a solution? Should we just be pointing to the scientists and saying, hey, fix this? Or is it something that we're kind of all really responsible for?
Of course, and that's really interesting. How did your creative journey, because you've been working for 20 years together, but I imagine you were artists before that. How did this creative journey bring you to this kind of images and objects that we are seeing just right now?
So we've always been inspired by nature, so interested in nature. But we recognize that nature is not just an image, it is a system. And And early on, we discovered the computer in our career as a tool where we could express ideas about nature in code. So similar to scientists, but obviously they call that modeling.
I suppose we like to refer it to more as like computer expressions. But our first long-term collaboration started in 2015, and we produced an experimental film about malaria transmission. And that was really interesting because we collaborated with a mathematical modeler exploring infection transmission scenarios. And our question at that point was really, what is the difference between an artistic model or a scientific model of disease transmission?
So the scientists that we worked with on this first kind of sci-art collaboration was keen to develop new ways of modelling disease transmission, to explore how land use change might be driving increases, for example, in zoonotic diseases. And in this particular project, he was looking at a case, a form of monkey malaria, which is transmitted to humans by mosquitoes.
So I suppose when we think of our creative journey, if we just play a little clip.
Yeah, so we'll just play a clip of that work that came from that collaboration.
So the models that the scientists were showing with us were really really incredibly abstract. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to present that transmission scenario from a landscape perspective, so that we could really kind of get a sense of how that disease would inhabit the landscape. And I suppose this is really kind of our history in a way, that we had this kind of shared interest in using computer technologies to express or to explore the way that we understand the world. And that's kind of led us increasingly to work quite closely with scientists and research groups.
That's absolutely fascinating, and it's really interesting, as you say, you are interested in nature as a system, and technology in some kind of way is a system. And that's really interesting because you've been working with scientists, several groups in several systems, but you've been working, for example, with Arizona Cancer Evolution Center, and this is in the Biodesign Institute in the USA. This type of collaboration is not as frequent here in France. Can you elaborate, for example, on the way you were working with the scientists? As you said, sometimes what they bring to you is really very abstract.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because this collaboration happened. It was a long-term collaboration, and it started in 2018. And they have a scientific research curator there, which is fantastic. And she invited us to spend time in two labs there. So in the lab of Carlo Meli, his work is centered on computer modeling of cancer. And then also in another lab as well, Athena Actopus's lab, she looks at cancer through the lens of psychology. So we were really lucky to be able to work across these two labs. And that's when we met Dr. Angelo Fortunato, who is developing new model organisms to study cancer.
And we found Angelo really, really interesting because he had two PhDs. He had a background both in biomedical science and in ecology. And this gave him a very kind of quite an unusual perspective on the topic that he was working on. And we spent quite a lot of time shadowing him in his kind of daily working practice to understand more about his motivations and his kind of practices and really kind of the subject that he was working with, the materials that he was working with. And this led to us working with him together to invent an imaginary model organism that was kind of built on some of his intuitions.
So we started building a virtual model organism in 3D. So you can see it here on the screen, called a chemozoa. And we built this within a game engine. But as we were developing it, each time we had a question about how this organism would work, we just arranged an interview with a scientist who worked in that specialist area, because we had this whole breadth of different scientists that we could contact. And this led to a really quite a complex organism with a life cycle that involved consuming toxic algae so that it could manage its cancerous situation.
So although these were kind of fictions, they were very much kind of fictions that were invented around the research and the truths and things that could genuinely exist.
Are a great many.
So we're just playing now a short trailer from this work, but also the accompanying documentary that kind of runs alongside this work as well.
So I think one vision of the future is that everybody will get cancer at some point in their lives, but you'll just live with it. And so it'll just be a normal part of a stage of life.
Angelo has managed to cultivate some amazing organisms in the lab. They're simple multicellularity. They don't have as many tissues as we do.
One thing we think about is evolution as a great problem solver, and then can we translate that into doing better cancer prevention in humans?
Why these animals, they are not developing cancer, and that they have something that we don't know.
A song made of a million frail voices united in a search.
So this work is presented as a 3-channel video installation that combines computer simulation, filmed environments, and a kind of a voiceover narration that kind of translates the science into a more poetic and non-technical form. And it was really interesting because as a process, we found that this process really kind of allowed the scientists to express their ideas in a way that normally isn't open to them. That the way they normally publish their kind of publish their work is quite restraining in a way, and it granted a lot more freedoms to the way that they could explore and express some of the things that they were working on.
Wonderful and very vibrant. So this leads me to another question, which is really interesting after seeing those images, wonderful images. What kind of stages, as we will be talking about that for the whole weekend in Forum Design, what kind of stages do you think we're gonna imagine or give to non-human objects and non-human being or way of life as we can see them? And how does the practice you have as artist and working with scientists do help you to cope with this world which is coming, which is already there? And we have to imagine these stages for those kind of form and objects.
Well, that's quite a big question. We'll try and answer all of those. I suppose whilst working on chemozoa, so the project that we just showed you, we were also in residence in the Mar Menor in southern Spain.
So we can play a little clip.
Yes, and when we were there, we were researching anthropic algal blooms, which kind of fed into the chemozoa project as well, because the chemozoa eat toxic algae. And yeah, so we'll just play a clip of this project and then hopefully respond to your question.
El hombre no puede sobrevivir sin las microalgas. Las microalgas seguro que sobrevivirán sin el hombre, sin ninguna duda.
So I think what's in answer to your question, what's really interesting for us from our perspective is that we spend a lot of our time moving between these two contexts, the biomedical context and the environmental context, working with biomedical scientists and scientists working with conservation and ecological research groups. And, they're both concerned with ideas of health, but one very much inside the body and one very much outside the body.
So we've also been pursuing this in a current work that we're working on now, which is called Call of the Silent Cell. And this is due to be released this autumn. And so this film also considers habitat loss, so both inside and outside the body. So thinking about these two different spaces.
And it kind of gives us so thinking about that idea of what kind of status that we afford the non-human, that really it's allowed us to kind of form this way of thinking where there's not really that much that separates us from the rest of the natural world, that really humans are just a very kind of thin skin of cells that really kind of divide these two internal and external spaces. So I suppose you could say that they have the same status, or
well, I don't know. Like,
probably
I would
less.
say no.
Yeah,
I would actually say that
Humans
humans
have
have less.
Yeah.
But I think you could write a whole paper on that, maybe. So we probably won't cover it now.
But I think it's interesting also to see that you are not perfectly on the same touch as a juror, which is really interesting. But which leads me to a last question. You focuses, and we can see that you focus on nature and non-human form of life and the relationship we have, because we are part of nature, but you are using very advanced technology developed by humans, but it's technology. Is there a paradox in that way? You were using the word system for defining both of this domain, but how do you deal with this apparent opposition?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think for us, the paradox is not so much the contradiction between advanced technology and non-human nature. So, for example, the term non-human is helpful only in the short term. Humans are really no more, like you were sort of describing earlier, than a thin wall of cells that separate an outer and an internal ecology. So it's more about the choices we make, I think, like our vision that become like our vision for technology. So like you can see here in the White Cart Loom, we made this project whilst we were in residence in Paisley, Scotland, which is very much famous for its textile industry. And then we revisited the birth of computing. Didn't we?
So the kind of Jacquard loom is really kind of, I suppose, the birth of the modern era. It's the first kind of programmable machine, based on an earlier invention by the Frenchman. I'm probably going to really pronounce the name badly here, but Basile Bouchon.
Okay.
And really kind of the loom kind of it offered these two very interesting possibilities that were quite new. So that with that whole kind of period of mechanization. So the first was that it kind of offered this incredible possibility to explore diversity, the potential of programming the loom to explore different combinations of patterns and forms. And the second affordance was that it offered the possibility of mass production, unitization and mass production. And when we kind of look at history and how things kind of played out, it was really the second of those two ideas that really gains traction, and the one that kind of really kind of predominates most of contemporary culture.
So when we made this reconstruction of this loom, this Jacquard loom, it was important for us that our loom returned to the first return to the first generating one.
The first
sort of
that first possibility
yeah.
of this kind of fantastic idea that we could create a huge diversity, you know, and really celebrate kind of diversity.
And it was important for us that, you know, that each form was like unique as well, because when we run this, the idea behind this work is that it creates a form for every human alive on Earth. So we're kind of exploring that diversity that is in nature. And the forms that you see here were inspired by freshwater pearl mussels as well, which are now extinct in Paisley, where we actually researched for this project. And the reason why they're extinct is because the river became polluted from that textile industry.
Yeah. So, I mean, so I suppose to answer the question, that we feel that the human kind of relationship with technology, you know, it is paradoxical if we choose it to be so, that it's really kind of very much a choice, and that if we do, you know, it's a choice that if we make that choice, it's one that will in time be corrected by natural forces.
Thank you so much for this wonderful answer and conclusion. Thank you very much, Vicky Isley, Paul Smith, Boredom Research, and thank you for the preview of this wonderful work you'll be displaying in autumn. It was great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Great,
Zoe.
thank you.
It was lovely talking to you. Thank you.